second bag, the second brown bag series for this year. My name is Samuel Ojuolorontoba. I'm at the Institute of African Studies here at Carleton University, and I'm the coordinator of this program. With us today is Professor Damilola Agbalajobi, who will be speaking to us on batting. That topic I just like it so much. It looks so professorial. Bullet, Batons, and Silence, analyzing the state response to 2024 End Bad Governance protests in Nigeria. So it's 1 o'clock. We normally start by 1, but people are coming. Should we wait a bit or like 2 minutes? I don't do what we call African time. I just like to just go straight on time. But should we? Okay, yeah, people are just joining. Yeah. So maybe by 1:03, I can start the introduction, and then she can start. You can present for 40 minutes. I know professors can talk for 2 hours, but we have to finish by 2:30, so you can present and then the audience will engage. And thank you so much for agreeing to speak during our Brown Bag lecture series here at the Institute of African Studies. Okay, the director is also joining. Welcome, Professor Nduka Otiono, the director of African Study at Carleton University. Okay, so 1 minute more. Okay, I'm sure people will join us more. We have more people joining us. Thanks again for coming. Like I said, my name is Samuel Olorontoba. The coordinator of this Brown Bag series. We have with us the director of African Studies. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And to our guest speaker, whom I have known for 30, how many 30 something years now? For 34 years. As my classmate, she looks so young. I think I'm still young too. But she's a full professor at the Department of Political Science, Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. And she'll be talking to us today about bullets, batons, and silence, analyzing the state response to 2024 End Bad Governance protests in Nigeria. Just a little about her bio. She's a professor of political science and gender specialist whose research spans gender and governance, women in politics and peace building, gender and corruption, gender impact of climate change, gender-based violence, and the role of violence in elections. Her work has appeared in peer-reviewed journals, including World Development and in edited volumes on women power and development. Since 2008, she has received multiple travel grants to present at international conferences and has secured competitive research funding, notably serving as principal investigator on an NRF TED Fund project on the political inclusion of persons with disability in Nigeria. And she currently serves as political settlement researcher with the African Cities Research Consortium, the Lagos team, and she just completed a fellowship as a senior research fellow at the Global Forum on Democracy and Development, Bogota Hub. Professor Damilola holds a PhD in political science from the University of Lagos and is a faculty member in the Department of Political Science at OAU. Her teaching and mentorship complement a sustained record of policy-relevant research and engagement across academic, civic, and international development spaces. Welcome, Professor Damilola Agbalajobi. Or the HOD, I
Thank you
mean,
very much.
or the director, you have a few comments to make to welcome her to African Studies. You can say it more than anybody. We are not hearing you. What's happening? Okay, maybe she. Okay, are you? Hello? Oh, okay. Yes. Okay, so please go ahead. Sorry to disturb your thoughts. So go ahead. Welcome aboard.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you so much, Professor Lontoba, my brother and friend, for giving me this privilege. I want to appreciate the director of the Institute of African Studies, and welcome everybody. I'm going to be presenting bullet batons and silencing, analyzing the state response to 2024 end bad governance protest in Nigeria. Do you want me to share my screen or should I go ahead and present?
I want to see your screen. Oh. We want to see
Okay.
how they batter everybody and all those things. Let me give
I
you
didn't
the
show pattern.
eh?
I'm sharing already. I'm
Oh,
sharing
okay.
already.
Oh, I didn't know you have the sharing. Right. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so basically, my study is going to be analyzing the Nigerian government response to my name is Damilola Gbalajobi, my brother said so, and I'm looking at bullet batons and silencing, analyzing the state response to the 2024 end band governance protests in Nigeria. And basically, I'm looking at the government response to the protest, which was a youth-led movement that was triggered by worsening economic conditions, fuel subsidy removal, and systemic governance failure. And basically, this Nigeria had actually witnessed a resurgence of citizen-led protests even before the 2024 end bad governance protests. And these protests were driven by deepening socioeconomic hardship. We had comes from widespread corruption and persistent government failure. And we had scholarship that argued that activism had the kind of had a long kind of shaped Nigerian political landscape with youth movements in particularly emerging as very important critical factors in demanding for accountability and reform. And so they use digital platforms to amplify this trend. So enabling these young people to mobilize around shared frustrations and articulate some collective grievances. But the 2020 NSAS movement kind of marked a kind of watershed movement in the contemporary Nigerian activism because social media played a very central role in documenting different issues that happened around that period. We had police brutality, coordinating centralized protest actions, and fostering transnational solidarity. But despite that constitutional guarantee of free expression and assembly, the Nigerian state had consistently responded to civil dissent with coercion, with kind of intimidation and impunity. But the 2024 end bad governance protest kind of reflected this enduring pattern again, revealing a state apparatus that kind of remain deeply resistant to public accountability. And so the title, Bullets, Batons, and Silence, captures the layered nature of state response to civic dissent in Nigeria. And while bullet and baton symbolizes the visible, the coercive instrument of repression that was deployed by a security agency ranging from live ammunition to physical intimidation, while silence, however, represents a more insidious dimension of governance, where the state's chronic neglect of essential sectors such as education, health, energy, is kind of its strategic non-responsiveness to citizens' demand and its deliberate exploitation of poverty, ethnicity, and religion to fragment collective action. So this silence, I see it as not pervasive. The argument is that it's a tool, it's a political tool that kind of shapes everyday life, producing apathy in response, weakening civic trust, and constraining opportunities for mobilization. So together, this dynamic illustrates how both overt violence and structural abandonment defines the lived experiences of Nigerian citizens and form the backdrop against which the 2024 protest unfolded. The overview of the 2024 bad governance protests, we had violence protests erupted at a time when, in 2024, that was between August 1 and 10, 2024. And then they basically articulated some 10 core demands that were reflecting widespread frustration with corruption, economic hardship, and governance failure. So the immediate trigger of that end bad governance was the removal of forest subsidy then. We had rapid inflation taking place, and a steep depreciation of the naira then, from about 650 to about 1,600 per dollar. This resulted in severe decline in living standards of the people. And then, of course, the protests emerged amid this deepening cost of living crisis that was marked by cost of food rising and, of course, stagnant wages of the people. So while the protests subsided in some regions, in some places like Kano, Kaduna, Bauchi, and Rivers, it went on. And so despite the fact that there was heightened civic engagement, the movement achieved limited policy reforms. In several states, there were criminal infiltrations that led to violence, that promoted curfew and IT security responses. But the initial government response was one of indifference when they had heard about this protest. And what they did was try to kind of use political elites to discourage people from participating through some town hall meetings and public statements. But of course, we later know that the Amnesty International, for example, documented extensive human rights violations during this protest, including the death of some people, and victims were reportedly shot at close range. And this kind of caused a lot of problems, even though later the Nigerian police eventually went on to deny this kind of allegations. But we have historical antecedents that kind of helps us to explain or to discuss what kind of state repression we have had in Nigeria. State repression in Nigeria has deep historical roots, extending from colonial rule through successive military regimes in Nigeria. Colonial authorities at the time relied on coercion, they relied on indirect rule and emergency legislation to suppress dissent. For example, we have the Aba women's riots and various labor uprisings. And so military government continued this legacy through decrees, censorship, and indefinite detention. And of course, even when we went into the civilian rule in 1999, we see how repressive practices continued. And then we had scholars arguing that the post-colonial state still inherited that kind of normalized coercive governance structure within the system. But basically, one thing we notice is that beyond this overt coercion, scholars highlighted silence as a form of subtle but very, very powerful instrument of state repression. And silence manifested itself in chronic underinvestment in essential sectors such as education, health, and energy, as well as a state persistent non-responsiveness to citizens' grievances. So this structural silence produced condition of deprivation, and this deprivation kind of weakened civic capacity and kind of normalized hardship amongst the people. So silence was seen as also very strategically deployed by the government, weaponizing poverty, using ethnicity and religion as a tool to fragment potential coalitions and kind of either this unified mobilization among the citizens. So this fragmentation functions as a form of discursive silencing, and thereby limiting citizens' ability to articulate their shared grievances and challenge state power. But what was the role of the social media in all this? The social media kind of has transformed political mobilization in Nigeria with platforms like X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp. These enable citizens to kind of voice their grievances. It helps them to coordinate their protest activities and hold the state accountable. For example, during the EndSARS movement, digital activism played a very central role in documenting the different police brutality that they experience and fostering global solidarity. And then the activism kind of created a shared identity across geographical and ethnic divide. And so during the 2024 End Bad Governance protest, the social media also served a very prominent role. It served as a primary engine of mobilization. It actually also facilitated decentralized coordination across the different places. And we have rapid information sharing and real-time documentation of what was happening, state violence. But the state still responded with digital repression, using internet itself, content removal requests, and targeting surveillance with the people. But one thing that was important was a notable dimension of that 2024 End Bad Governance protest was the strategic use of the multilingual communication to broaden participation across Nigeria's diverse socio-linguistic landscape. We have activists employed different English that was employed. They use Nigerian Pidgin, they use Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo in both online messaging and then physical protest materials. And this kind of enabled the movement to transcend the typical urban English dominant activist demographics. And so English served as a primary language for national and international communication on platforms such as X and all the Facebook we know. But the Nigerian Pidgin functioned at that period as a linguistic bridge that actually helped to facilitate inclusive communication across the class and educational divide. In northern Nigeria, for example, we have the Hausa language content, the amplified grievance across the food inflation that was taking place. And that helped to contribute to significant mobilization in states like Kaduna, Katsina, Kaduna, and Kano. In places like Yoruba, the Northwest and the Northeast, Yoruba and Igbo was used. And this grounded the protest in local experience of the people within this location. And though through participation, although kind of participation varied due to regional political dynamics in these places. So by localizing this protest message in multiple languages, I observed that organizers kind of transformed the movement from an internet protest into a nationwide mobilization that kind of resonated with everyday experience of what people were experiencing, like hunger, hardship, and governance failure. So this linguistic inclusivity kind of helped to strengthen the movement's capacity to articulate shared grievances and foster national identity and solidarity, despite the fact that Nigeria was entrenched ethnic and regional division. And so the similar this multilinguistic strategy have been deployed in some places, documented in global protest movement. We have examples like Egypt uprising, we have the Hong Kong anti-extradition protest, and we also have the Belarus demonstration. This kind of thing that was adopted here. And so the study draws highly from the political opportunity theory, a framework that kind of emphasizes how the broader political environment shapes the emergence, the strategies, and outcomes of social movements. And so the theory posits that collective action does not just arise solely from shared grievances, but from perceived openings in the political system that signals the possibility or the necessity of mobilization. And so these political opportunities, it's considered as structural shifts that weakens existing power agreements or kind of creates vulnerabilities within governing regimes. So this shift may include either early division, reduced state capacity, or increased public dissatisfaction. And so other scholars argue that political opportunity consists of institutional features that can either facilitate or constrain mobilization, shaping the strategies available to challenging groups. So this theoretical model is very relevant for us to understand the 2024 End Bad Governance protest, because the movement did not just emerge in a vacuum. It was shaped by long-standing patterns of state repression, socioeconomic hardship, and political exclusion. So the protest itself reflected both the closing of former political opportunities because of the repression, because of neglect, and because of long-term institutional decay. And of course, opening up informal opportunities through digital platforms, youth networks, and shared experience of deprivation. And so to deepen this theoretical analysis, the study extended the political opportunity theory by incorporating silence as a critical dimension of state power. Because we have, while traditional application of the theory actually just focus on overt repression, recent scholarship highlights silence as a political significant practice in both democratic and authoritarian contexts. Because silence is not just the absence of speech. It's also a form of political action that can structure agency, that can actually constrain participation and shape the boundaries of civic engagement. But in the Nigerian context, silence operates as a mechanism that closes political opportunities in three critical ways. For example, the state chronic neglect of essential sectors, for example, education, health, energy, kind of create a condition of deprivation. This kind of deprivation weakened the state capacity to mobilize. And this actually aligns with Galton's concept of structural violence, where harm is produced not through direct force, but through institutional abandonment. And we also have the state deliberate non-responsiveness to public demands, which was a kind of strategic silence, a refusal to engage protest grievances, and suppression of accountability mechanism. That kind of institutional channels are ineffective. So this reduces citizens' expectation of meaningful change within the society. And of course, we discourage engagement and thereby narrowing political opportunities. And then also, there was weaponizing poverty, ethnicity, religion. Political elites kind of foster social division so that it prevented the people from forming a coalition, a unified coalition to fight against what they didn't, what was happening to them. So this fragmentation functions as a form of discursive silence, limiting the articulation of shared grievances and weakening collective action. So integrating silence into this political opportunity theory helps us to provide a more comprehensive understanding of how the Nigerian state shapes the terrain of protest, because silence has then become an active modality of control, complementing bullets and batons. And how did they do this? They constrain civic agency. They kind of end up producing apathy and then limiting the perceived viability of resistance. So this theoretical framework kind of enabled this study to situate the 2024 End Bad Governance protest within a broader pattern of state behavior and historical legacies of repression, evolving form of civic resistance. And it provides us a lens through which to compare Nigerian experiences with global protest movement, as I mentioned before, where similar dynamics of repression, digital mobilization, and linguistic inclusivity have shaped political contention. What method was used here? Basically, we adopted a quantitative case study design using the 2024 End Bad Governance protest as a lens through which we examine how the Nigerian state responded to civic unrest and citizen-led activism. And so this approach helped us to have an in-depth exploration of the lived experiences of protesters, the strategies deployed by the state, and the broader socio-political implication of these interactions. There was primary data collected through semi-structured interview, and then purposely selected individuals who had participated in the protest. And so participants are drawn from both the north and the southern region, so that we can have a kind of ensure the kind of diversity of experiences, and so that I can capture regional variation in state response and the protest dynamics. And basic findings, we had a kind of reflexive framework to identify the patterns of meaning in participant account of their involvement in the 2024 End Bad Governance protest. And predominantly, it was an inductive approach that allowed us to code to emerge organically from all the narrative of the participants that we interviewed. And so 5 major themes reflecting a distinct dimension of the protest experience. And so we have one that looked at the living condition of structural neglect, and one that said that the social media serve as a double-edged tool, repression and the expanding tactics of state control. Disinformation was used as a tool of legitimization, and then civic renewal amid fragmentation and fear. Looking at the structural neglect and everyday survivor, across all the narratives, participants, both from those interviewed and online, emphasized that the protest was not triggered by a single event, but it was the accumulation of a long-standing experience of state abandonment, structural neglect, which manifested in insecurity, unaffordable education, unemployment, failing infrastructure was described as a persistent feature of life in Nigeria. And so I remember one participant stating that what drove us to protest in the street, quoting the participant, was wasn't just one event. It was years of watching our country deteriorate. The government has failed us. Students couldn't afford to go to school or to stay in school. People are hungry, and life is becoming unbearable. And so if it felt that nobody was listening, so the protest became the only option. And so other participants also mentioned that silence was no longer an option. So the protest became the only language the government could hear. So for many, the protest was not a political luxury. It was a survival strategy, a way of reclaiming the visibility in a system that kind of hindered them or rendered them irrelevant. And so participants repeatedly described the state silence as a defining feature of their daily lives because they felt that the silence was experienced not only in moments of crisis, but in the routine appearance of absence of government support, either in their education, in their healthcare, electricity, and employment. As one participant put it, the government is silent when we need them most. Silent in our schools, silent in our hospitals, silent even in our future. So the everyday silence contributed to this widespread apathy as citizens increasingly perceived a political engagement as futile. So this resulting disengagement kind of reinforced a circle in which poor governance persisted unchallenged and further entrenching this structural neglect. And so, of course, as Carlton said, the concept of structural violence, where harm is produced through institutional abandonment rather than direct forces. That's one of the findings. And then we have the other that sees the social media as a double-edged sword, and where the participant anonymously described the social media as the engine of mobilization during the protest, because platforms like Twitter, X, WhatsApp, Zoom kind of provided essential infrastructure for organizing, for coordinating, and for sustaining the movement. So everything about the protest was organized online, said the participant. The movement wouldn't have taken off without them. So the social media kind of served as a platform, a visual public sphere for enabling activists to educate supporters. They use it to counter misinformation that was going on, and also they use it to monitor different unfolding events in real time. So, however, this empowerment came with a lot of vulnerabilities because some participants described they were being targeted, there were a lot of harassment, online intimidation, and there was a lot of coordinated effort to silence dissent. So people flooded, some people said their account were being flooded with insult, false accusation. So some of them actually felt targeted. And from the experience of the NSAS that shape activists' digital strategies, so many people then felt it was better for them to appear anonymous or low visibility online to avoid some kind of surveillance, because some people felt even the secret services were being monitoring them. But despite these risks, social media still remain a very, very important, indispensable, a contested but vital space where resistance was negotiated and solidarity was forged at this time. In addition, we had repression and the expanding tactics of state control, even during this period, because most of the participants described a kind of a multifaceted and adaptive system of repression, because it combined the use of physical force, intimidation, surveillance, and psychological pressure. Because what seems calm can quickly turn into violence, as we see. And there was this constant tension between hope and fear. And there was a preemptive repression, which was common. So because we had participants receiving threatening calls from security operatives even before the protest began. And so it was an intention to scare them off, to disrupt the plan before they even gathered at all. So there was digital surveillance, heightened activity sets of. So the people themselves kind of felt vulnerable because there was a lot of digital surveillance going on. And so there was also the treatment of minors as adults, where they kind of arrested some individuals that are very visibly very young, but claiming they were not adults. So these different tactics, but despite these tactics, participants kind of expressed profound resilience in what they were doing. And so, though there was kind of silencing through division and deprivation, some of the participants emphasized the repression extended beyond bullets and batons, because there was this state's long-term strategy of using that, weaponizing poverty, trying to divide people along ethnic and religious differences, and thereby fostering mistrust among communities. It was a very deliberate effort to silence collective actions among the people. But several respondents argue that this division prevented from forming a common front. And basically, the hope was to weaken the potential for sustained mobilization, as we see. We also have the disinformation used as a tool of um, delegitimization. And what we saw was that participants described coordinated disinformation campaign. And basically, what this was used to do was to aim at undermining the movement's credibility. And so the state-aligned media portrayed protesters as foreign agents or criminals. They would say some were hired from Kenya, they were being sponsored by foreigners. And so they kept pushing the idea that they were puppets so that they could ignore the real reason people were protesting. So the government then mobilized economically vulnerable individuals. Then they carried placards to stage counter protests. Some of them were given money. Even after collecting the money, they said they carried a placard. They didn't know what was even written. Some of them didn't even know what was written on the placards. And they still started fighting for the money they gave them. In northern Nigeria, this formation was exploited, and they used the religion and cultural sensitivity to kind of penetrate to the people. But despite this, all these efforts, the lived reality of deprivation, hunger, was too powerful to suppress what people were going through. And so no amount of propaganda, is one of the respondents said, could cover up empty stomach, or broken schools. It was visible. And then it engendered a kind of civic renewal amid the fragmentation and fear. There was despite all this repression, despite the misinformation, despite the social division that was taking place, some of the participants that identified a renewed sense of civic consciousness emerging from the protest. And I can say that you can see some of these emerging from the last electoral reform protest that's taking place recently in Nigeria. So it showed that we haven't lost hope. Young people still believe in change. And that's why their advocacy is still going on, that there must be a change. And even in conservative regions, subtle acts of defiance signaled resistance to impose silence. And so the numbers weren't very huge that came out, basically. But the numbers were people, but coming out at all was a powerful statement. So the participants kind of acknowledged the organization challenges that happened. But they emphasized that there was a symbolic power of visibility. And because what mattered was that people showed up at all. The people refused to stay silent in the face of challenges. So the protest was basically not merely demanding for policy change, was a kind of act of reclaiming their voices and their space. And that was a kind of way to remind the governments and the world that the youth are still here. And so when we look at this, basically, the finding of this study actually illustrates a kind of a complex interplay between structural neglect, digital mobilization, state repression, and civil resilience in 2024 end bad governance protest. And so when interpreted through the lens of the political opportunity theory, the protest revealed a political environment in which formal avenues for participation remained largely closed, while informal and digital spaces provided alternative, though very precarious because of the challenges it faced. But it was a channel for civic expression. So for structural neglect, we saw that it actually underscored how chronic deprivation and state abandonment functions as a catalyst for mobilization. Because looking at the different participant narrative, it revealed that the protest was not merely a reaction to immediate economic shocks, but it was an expression of accumulated frustration with state that has remained silent in the face of citizens' daily struggle. And so when we look at it in the light of the Galton concept of structural violence, where harm is produced through institutional absence rather than direct coercion, the state silence in face of critical sectors like education, health, energy, it kind of creates a condition that both necessitate and constrain protest. So the study extends this political opportunity theory by demonstrating how silence itself has operated as a political opportunity closing mechanism because silence signals institutional unresponsiveness. And of course, it reduces the citizens' expectations of meaningful change and foster apathy. And that's why it seems that the young ones don't even want to come out to vote, not to talk of participating in protests or violence. But it also interacts with more overt forms of repression, where that's bullets and batons, and that's to shape the terrain of civic engagement. So in this sense, silence is not passive. It is an active modality of governance that structures agency, that limits participation, and that shapes the boundaries of dissent. So these findings also kind of highlight the dual role of social media, because it actually acts as an enabler in one way, and also as a site of vulnerability, because the state was also using it to monitor, as surveillance. So digital platforms kind of facilitated decentralized mobilization because of the different regions where it took place. But of course, it was used for rapid information sharing, and of course, the creation of a shared protest identity. Yet, of course, as I said, it also kind of exposed the people to surveillance, to a lot of harassment and targeted repression. And so this duality kind of reflects global patterns observed in movements, as we've seen. And so the multilingual outreach strategy also employed during this particular protest further also demonstrated how activists adopted, or how they adapted to the Nigerians, given the fact that Nigeria had a social linguistic diversity, and they used this diversity to build national solidarity by communicating either in English, and Nigerian Pidgin, Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo, because that helps to transcend the regional and class divide that we have. And transforming what would have might have remained as an urban digital central protest into a nationwide mobilization. So this mirrors global protest movement, where linguistic inclusivity has been used to articulate shared grievances across diverse populations. And so when we look at the state of repression, it kind of reveals a shift from overt physical violence to more sophisticated forms of control. Because of course, we know the use of digital surveillance, preemptive intimidation, the weaponization of legal and administrative tools. And so we had participants accounting for targeted phone calls. They were tracking them real time. They were even mistreating minors, illustrating a security apparatus that has been adapted to the decentralized nature of contemporary protest movement. And of course, the use of disinformation, this actually emerged as a central strategy for delegitimizing the movement. And so in most, what we see was them framing protesters as foreign agents or as criminals. And so the state was trying to use a way to fracture the public support for them and obscure the structural grievance driving mobilization. So this tactic was consistent, or it kind of, let me say, it's consistent with what we see with global authoritarian practice, why they use narrative manipulation is used to undermine civic resistance. But despite these challenges, the theme of civic renewal demonstrates that the protest fostered a renewed sense of political agency, particularly among the young ones, because we could see that they kind of still went on to, and it's kind of still inherent in what we see within our society today. So taken together, these findings kind of reveal a political landscape that is marked by both repression and resilience. And Nigerian state continues to rely on these coercive and silent forms of control. Yet the citizens, especially the young ones, are increasingly asserting their right to visibility. They are asserting their right to voices and participation. And I think that can account for what we saw in the recent protests for the electoral reform, despite the fact that they were being thrown live bullet and live tear gas and the stuff. But these young ones are still increasingly asking for a change. And therefore, in conclusion, the 2024 End Bad Governance protest kind of represents more than a movement of civil unrest. It reflects a deeper crisis of governance, where we have lack of accountability. And so the state response, characterized by violent crackdowns, digital restrictions, disinformation, and strategic silence kind of reinforces a persistent pattern of repression. And this undermines democratic norms and basically end up weakening public trust. So the integration of the bullet, batons, and silence, they are kind of analytical categories that reviews the multifaceted nature of state power in Nigeria, where we know that bullets and batons represent visible or coercion as it is, and why in other way, violence, silence captures this structural and strategic form of repression that shapes everyday life. So together, they illustrate how the state manages dissent, not only through force, but also through neglect, also through fragmentation and non-responsiveness. So despite these constraints, the kind of protest we saw demonstrated the resilience, the determination of Nigerian youth and other marginalized groups. And so, of course, through the multilingual outreach, through digital mobilization, through collective actions, the different protesters, they challenge both the physical and the symbolic mechanism of repression. So the action basically underscores the urgent need for institutional reform that protect the right to protest, to ensure accountability for security forces, and address the social conditions that fuel civic unrest. So ultimately, the 2024 protest reaffirms that even in the context of fear and fragmentation, citizens continue to assert their agencies. They continue to demand for justice and imagine alternative futures. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you very much. You've done such a great justice to the topic. Now we know what batons and buttons and everything, we know what that means. Thank you so much. I believe there will be people who will want to make some contribution, ask questions, and things like that. But just for me to first say that this look very paradoxical when you consider the fact that the people in government today, just about 12 years ago, they were in opposition. And previous to that time, they were on the trenches fighting democracy. So, what will you explain? What do you think explain this kind of contradictions where some people who were protesting, looking for, asking for reform, asking for change in governance just less than 2 decades ago, they are now at the helm of the affair, and then they are also using the instrument of the state to repress people who are protesting like they did before. What do you think explained for that in terms of pathology and psychology of power?
Yeah, thank you very much. We obviously know what politics does to people. And as I said, I remember during Good Luck Jonathan's regime, when there was this fuel crisis and the labor union, everybody came out to protest. Unfortunately, this same set of people today are the ones who are using the state party to repress journalists, to repress protesters. Unfortunately, it's difficult for us to be able to ascertain what goes on in the mind of politicians. It seems they forget what they've done in the past, but internet never forgets. And today people are using that thing against them, saying, remember these years, you were the same people asking for this. So unfortunately, we do not have a formidable opposition. And what I see is that Nigeria has not been able to form a formidable opposition to work against those who are in power. And also the fact that this insistent repression of it's difficult for us to have a formidable voice. And when we don't have a formidable voice, it makes it easier for those politicians to penetrate the people. And that is what they are using, and using the weapon of the state as a form of repression against the people. And unfortunately, this is what we continue to see with the politicians. Of course, politicians who we know have no common voice. They have no ideology. They have no goal. The only goal they have is their pocket. So it makes it, all that concerns them is not the citizen. They don't want to serve the interests of the people, not caring how hard it is for individuals to be able to make ends meet. Otherwise, when they care about the people who they are meant to serve, they will they will listen. They will give a listening ear to the agitations. People don't just want to agitate. They want to talk. They want to, the government is meant to listen. But fortunately, that is what we see. We don't have a listening ear for the government, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Questions, answers, contributions from the audience. Question, answers, interjections, and maybe the opposition. Maybe some government representatives are here who will say, no, what you are saying is not true. We actually give them the platform to protest and all of that. Yes, please feel free to raise your hand or to put it in the chat. I don't want to call anybody. I normally could just call students to talk. Ebenezer, I know you know so much about Nigerian politics. Do you want to have some comments there?
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. I'm not sure if you're in the evening. Greetings, sir. As well as thank you, Professor Agbalajobi, for the presentation. I apologize. I'm currently in transit, so I'm not. I only just listened in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, well, I don't. Well, you did a very professorial job. Maybe okay. Professor Rosemary, please go ahead.
Hi everyone. I'm not a professor, just a student. Thank you. This was a really wonderful presentation. I just wanted to say, and I just have a question about your contributions concerning or your statements concerning social media and digital platforms and their dual or multifaceted roles in government or political activism or political contributions. And first, you mentioned how social media was used to basically facilitate the protests and also how it is being used as a digital platform to hold certain leaders accountable, and how it was also used as a manipulative device to disinform the public about the protest and spread certain tensions concerning different sensitivities. So my question here is, what do you really think, like, what is the role fundamentally of social media in political activism? Do you think that um it maintains this middle ground role in these relationships, or does it have more advantages than disadvantages, or vice versa? What do you think concerning that?
Yeah, thank you, Rosemary, for your contribution and for this question. Yeah, I think for me, social media has multiple roles, and depending on the context and environment, for countries where the social media use is repressed, it becomes very difficult for the people to use. But for a country like Nigeria, even though it is allowed, but it is, for example, for this protest movement, it is used in both ways. So it can serve as an advantage or as a disadvantage, depending on which angle you're looking at it. For example, for the End Bad Governance protest, basically, most of the agitation, the information spread, the collective action was done on social media. Just like I remember the NSAS protest, for example. We were all sitting in our houses, and it was through the media we were monitoring and listening. But the same social media, for example, for the End Bad Government, was the same social media where we got the hear that the government is saying these young ones visibly seen people and said these are the young ones we caught, and they are not young ones. We could see young people, and that the government is saying these people were employed from neighboring countries. Some external people are funding them. So it can be used as positive or negative, depending on the context at which we are looking at. And social media, of course, it has a very positive, but for political communication, we know that it has both positive and negative use. We cannot say because for citizens who are agitating, yes, it was used, but the same citizens, because of the experience of the NSAS protest, some people had to be, using pseudonyms, anonymous, because they were scared of, because there was a lot of people tracking their calls. People were getting calls and being threatened. So social media has both positive and negative use in the recent, and we cannot do anything about it because we are in the age of the social media. So depending on the context in which you are looking at it. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Any other comment, please? Question for our esteemed guest speaker. So maybe I should probe you a bit further. You did mention there's no opposition, but it has, and you are very correct, because, and I share your idea that the political elites in Nigeria, they don't have ideology. Not only that, they don't even have a religion or ethnicity. They just use it as instrument of division, like you rightly said. But the civil society itself is problematic, because in the 90s, when we are championing and fighting for the military to return to the barracks, most of the people who eventually occupy political offices, they were key actors in this process. But we don't see them making any significant difference when they occupy political power positions. So what again do you think is responsible for that? Is it a structural problem, that the problem we fought against during the military rule continue in different way, even in a worse condition?
Thank you, Prof. I'm not sure I can really explain what accounts for the kind of things we are seeing today, even within the social movement, the different social movement, civil society organization we have in Nigeria today. We have opposition. Of course, we know that we are not yet one party state, but we know that the opposition itself, they are not acting as they should, as a formidable force to stand a ground and fight against bad governance. One of the ways oppositions would have helped Nigerian governance system is what we are not seeing. And because of politics itself, the inherent division within the different political groups is making it difficult for them to achieve the goal, the role of opposition within a country. And so also, maybe because we can say, given deprivation, poverty, and a form of silencing too, has made people who should be the voice for the people, the different civil society organizations that should arise to be a voice and a front for the people, have also become silent in the face of the different repression, weaponization of poverty. I think that could account for why they are silent and where we're no longer seeing this formidable voice. If people go hungry for many days, for years, or maybe because they're just tired of agitation that does not produce results. So basically, I cannot say this is the reason, but what obviously I feel is the fact that there's, of course, weaponization of poverty. There's, of course, the lack of cohesion among the different civil society organizations. There's, of course, the fact that the different political parties, opposition that we have, are they themselves not coherent. And because, as I said, the political parties, politicians, lack of ideology, they don't have focus. All they want position. So it doesn't matter on which platform they can get the position, they deviate to those platforms. And therefore, it makes it difficult for us to have a force that can come together as a cohesive force to fight against bad governance, which we are seeing in Nigeria today.
Great. Well, it's a long walk to freedom. Quoting Nelson Mandela autobiography. But thank you so much for the great work we are doing. Okay, Rosemary is coming again. She says she's not a professor. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Prof. So you mentioned, I just want to key in on this because you mentioned silence a lot here, and how silence is a tool that was used by not just the protesters, but on the other hand, by the government officials and state actors. So my question here is, on the other side of silence, usually when we have challenges or we have like certain sociopolitical issues that happen within the Nigerian state, at that point, there is usually this high influx of skits, yeah, like comedy, things like that. And for that, like the Nigerian people have been criticized as people who would turn a blind eye and rather do skits than to address the issues in their country. So in cases like this, how would you describe this skit making as a culture, as a growing trend and a culture in contemporary Nigeria? Do you think is a form of coping mechanism? Do you think is a form of comic escapism? Or do you think it's a criticism of the government using satirical and sarcastic means? Which do you think it is? Because there's always been this argument about what the skit making stands for.
Yeah, thank you very much for that beautiful question. And I never thought about it in this way. But I think for me, there are two roles it serves. First, as the skit makers use it as to create awareness. Nigerians are not silent, really. On the other side, government has been silent. When I talked about silence, I talked about silence in the face of repression, in the face of deprivation. They are silent in the fact that they are not providing. They are not providing for the people. They are silent in health. They are silent in the employment. They are silent in the education, infrastructural provision. Government is silent. But Nigerians are not silent. Nigerians only use two things. They use it as a form of awareness. Whatever happens in the world, in Nigeria, for example, Nigerians create a skit. They create the picture, and and picture speaks more than anything. Those skits in the minds of the people goes a long way, and they use it to pass a message. Not being silent about Nigerians have never been silent about anything happening in their country. And secondly, I could say is a way of releasing the tension also. But basically, it's not just releasing the tension. It's a way of letting people know what is happening. And so whatever happens, when Donald Trump said Nigeria is a country of a particular concern, whatever happens in the world, whatever happens within us, even when the president fell down, when he went for a state visit, Nigerians will create a skit about it. People who didn't know will know what happened. It's just a way of expression, of let people know, creating awareness about issues. And Nigerians are good at doing that in beautiful ways. And so somebody who didn't know about it before want to know, oh, what happened about this? And so it's not just like Nigerians they've never been, even in the face of oppression, even in the face of repression, even in the wake of deprivation, even in the wake of poverty and hunger, Nigerians will still find a way of voicing their opinions, and that is one of the ways they do it, using skits. And that's my contribution on that. I don't know if you have other thoughts. Thank you.
She's already clapping. Thank you very much. If there is no other comment, I just want to draw our attention to the announcement made by my colleague. IAS is a powerhouse of high-level intellectual engagement. Sibanda, do you want to ask question? Okay.
Oh,
So,
I have a question for Professor Agbalajobi.
please go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this presentation. Found it very informative. And
Please, can you introduce yourself? Are you from the State House or from Washington?
I'm a student at Carleton, Shegun Deputy, from the economics department.
Which university?
Carleton.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
I don't know you. Shegun Adepito, Leon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question was, during your investigation, did you find any proof of foreign intervention? Because I know you mentioned this on your point about social media as a double-edged sword, and the government using disinformation. So was there any proof of any of the protesters being, I guess, foreign intervention? And also, what are your thoughts about foreign influence on the protests? Like, are you in support of, other countries helping the protesters or not?
Okay, thank you very much, Shego. Yeah, I didn't find any evidence of foreign intervention when it came to the 2024 end bad governance protest. And for me, I don't think Nigeria even need anybody to, when people are deprived to a level, you don't need the foreigner to come and push you. For me, I don't subscribe to foreign intervention when it comes to the reality, lived experience of people. And for the 2024 end bad governance protest, there was really, for me, and for the people I spoke to, for my respondents, I didn't see any foreign external influences on what it was. Remember what happened in Kenya, the tax reform? It was a spiral thing that happened across Africa at that particular time. It wasn't anybody external influences really, but people were physically being traumatized. People were hungry. And so it's unfortunate that the only thing when I talk to my students and when we talk about it, the only reason why Nigeria has not disintegrated to what has happened in Nepal is because of even the social media, because of the fact that today there's multiple streams of income, not really very formidable income coming in, but because of our youth today can take advantage of these platforms, it has kept people too occupied with some things that makes it difficult for them to go out. Otherwise, maybe Nigeria would have turned to something else. So for me, I didn't hear or anything about external influences. And for me, I do not support external intervention when it comes to handling local issues within our country, Nigeria, or anywhere else for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll be having, okay, Shegu, is that clapping or another question?
This is Shegun Ilesomin. I'm calling from the US.
There are a lot
Um,
of Shegu here. I'm also Shegu. Please go
so,
ahead.
thank you, sir. I missed the early part of the presentation. I just wanted to ask maybe two questions. One has to do with the nature of public protest in Nigeria. You've been calling it Nigerian public protest, as if, and that implies that this is a protest. These are protests that are unified and cohesive. So, do you see any indication of divisions along lines of other patterns of divisions within the country itself, such that issues of ethnicity, of religion, and all of the region in part, so that you have all these other sources of fissures in the country that affect even the effectiveness of such protests and as means of expressing grievances. So that's one. The other, my second question has to do with the use of social media itself. As much as it can be a source of information dissemination, and can it also be a means of manipulation of public mind in terms of um, distorting the accuracy of information that is being put out, and sometimes amplifying beyond what is actually going. So how does the public overcome this potential for manipulation? So thank you, Prof.
Good afternoon, good day, Professor Elisa. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate your being here. Yeah, the first question about the nature of public protests in Nigeria, and is there any indication along ethnicity, the division along ethnic lines? Yeah, it's possible. I remember the NSAS protest in Nigeria, and what I observed with that protest was that the protesters themselves, the organizers of the protest, had a different intention. And there was this incursion of an alternative group, maybe from government, who knows whoever did that, infiltrated that protest and brought people using different, because it was basically people who were not schooled, people who didn't really understand the reason for the NSAS protest. So it's possible for us to have a kind of incursion that will cause a kind of a division when it comes to the goals, the objective for which the people, and that was what happened with the NSAS protest. And so the people who were destroying the BLT buses, who were burning properties, for God's sake, the people who were protesting lack of infrastructure, wouldn't have gone all out to destroy what government had bought with millions. So obviously the kind of infiltration takes place. But for the end bad governance protest, one of the things I observed, that's why I talked about the multilingual dimension, how there was a kind of a formidability and a cohesive approach, given the fact that even in Kaduna, in Katsina, in Kanu, using the different and the Nigerian pidgin language, it kind of, so it was this pocket of process across the different regions, all against this lack of provisions and bad governance in the different locations. And so that's to answer the first. And then the second question, the use of the social media, can it be used as a source of manipulation? Yes, I think one of the questions Rosemary asked actually has to do with that. Yes, definitely. I remember vividly also about the bad governance and then the NSAS protest. The government uses it as a tool of manipulation very, very rightly. I remember the NSAS. They said there was these people being sponsored from abroad. Some of them were, because there was this cohesiveness among these youth. They were being fed. They were being provided with all they needed to come together, like these what they call this protest that happened. I can't remember the name right now. But then it's possible. Most times the government tries to use it to manipulate the people, to distort information, to kind of cause a division, so that people who are supporting them with you, oh, is somebody sponsored? Like somebody asked me a question that, do I support foreign incursion into our protest? I said, no, definitely I do not. And so it's possible for the government to use it as a form of manipulation to distort the public and create a problem. And so what can be done to avert such? I think it's just it's still the social media. See, I don't think anybody wants to fight against the truth. When it's visible to everybody. If Nigerians are not suffering, nobody wants to cry foul. If Nigerians are enjoying the dividend of democracy as they should, they won't be saying the government is not providing the infrastructure they need. And so I don't think it's not difficult for people to to pick out the truth from manipulation. Yes, government can they can do anything to manipulate the truth, but the truth will always speak for itself. So what I think is, I suggest is that people should keep trying to listen to the voice of reality and the truth. And of course, it's visible to the people. You can't say that the government is doing what they are not doing. When they are doing that, people see that. And so I think those are the things we can do too, so that when people are protesting and you see that is somebody else who is trying to manipulate, people will then know that it is not the truth this time around, but some people trying to fight against the truth. Thank you very much, Prof. And it's good having you here, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for doing justice to the various questions. We're just trying to say that the IAS, the Institute of African Studies, is a powerhouse of intellectual programs. So we're having quite a lot. The semester is ending March 18. We have another program on March 25. We have another one. So please, the link is there. Try and register. And we look forward to seeing you for more engagement. And let's give a round of applause to our guest speaker once again. Bah, 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 bah. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you. We enjoy your very rich perspective. Thank you. Have a great day and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Good afternoon.